It's been reported that an illegal migrant has been charged with working illegally in the UK. But what did he get? And is it worth it? Will it be a deterrent to anybody else? And in the second half of the video, what would you do if you were on a train and some guy dropped his trousers in the presence of children and lots of other people? Would you intervene, and would you expect the law to protect you if you did so? More about that in the second half of the video. But first things first, let's take a look at this story, which is reported by The Sun. And it does come off the back of the government website saying that hundreds have been arrested for working as illegal delivery drivers when they're not supposed to be working at all. You've seen all the videos, and you probably saw my video of talking of illegal migrants out of hotels working as delivery drivers when they're not supposed to be working at all. So we'll take a look at that. But first of all, if you do like this legal analysis of what's going on in the news and what will affect you on a day-to-day basis, probably more and more so as we move through the year, please do subscribe to the channel. It's free. There's a big button just below the video. Hit that. About half of you still don't subscribe, and I'd be really grateful if you did. And thank you all so very much for 800,000 subscribers. We are well on the way to 1 million subscribers. So thank you very much. So let's go to this first story. It all starts with, it started with the videos of these illegal migrants working illegally as delivery drivers out of these hotels, and then the government saying that they're doing a broad clampdown on illegal delivery riders. It says illegal workers arrested in a nationwide enforcement surge as part of the government's drive to crack down on immigration crime. It says hundreds of arrests have been made across the country in a week-long crackdown. Under Operation Equalise, the Home Office immigration enforcement teams launched a nationwide intensification week of targeting illegal working hotspots with a focus on the gig economy, that's working as a delivery driver. They say they stopped 1,780 individuals, spoken to them, leading to 280 arrests for illegal working activity. Now, you remember that there was a Labour councillor, I think it was, who complained that the police were stopping people in her constituency, even though that's really not what she should have been upset about. She should have been upset about the illegal working and supporting the government in their endeavours. But by the by. Anyway, it's now reported that the first one of these has been convicted of working illegally for Deliveroo. However, whilst in an ideal world you might expect that to now act as a severe deterrent to all of the others to not work as delivery drivers earning thousands of pounds a week, what are they actually to do with him? Because it is the sort of offence that they won't just be sent to prison for, they'll usually be fined for. And in theory, they're not really supposed to have a lot of money because they're not supposed to be working. And if they are fined, how are they going to get the money? Because they aren't given very much money. I mean, they are given literally just about enough money to survive on, if that really, and they're given enough food in the hotels and so on, but by the by. So on this occasion, the justices gave him a conditional discharge, meaning he's let free, but he probably has to agree that he's not going to offend again. So after hearing that this chap was already in debt, was a first-time offender, he's been given a conditional discharge and must pay the victim surcharge for £26, which I suspect is only about an hour or two for an illegal Deliveroo driver. And apparently he'll be back in September if he hasn't paid the victim surcharge. Now, in theory, non-payment of the victim surcharge could see him going to prison. But again, is that realistic? I somewhat doubt it. And what if he doesn't turn up? Because he might just well disappear, knowing that there might be a risk of him going to prison if he turns up and he hasn't paid it. So not much of a deterrent overall. But as I said, reportedly, he's the first, in the last 6 months at least, to turn up to court to face these charges of working illegally as a fast food delivery rider, and at least 3 others were also reportedly charged, but failed to appear, and they've since disappeared. The Sun says that it's exposed multiple different hotels where lots of people are working, and even according to the Home Office official numbers, 1,780 individuals were stopped and spoken to, leading to 280 arrests for illegal working. And they say as a result of the operation, 53 individuals are now having their asylum support reviewed, which could result in their support being suspended or withdrawn. But then what happens then? If they have all the support suspended, and presumably they mean hotel support, food support, money support, and so on. If that is all suspended, it's one thing to say people don't like the idea of them being housed in hotels at the taxpayer expense and so on. But logistically, in reality, where will they go? Will they just end up on the streets? Because then they are even more likely to work illegally and even more likely to become a problem to the rest of society. in the most polite way possible, but that's likely what's going to happen. And even then, if they do have that support withdrawn, because of ECHR, and even if it has an effect on their asylum application, because of ECHR, all of the same arguments and the same reasoning can still be used to delay, to set aside any decision to withdraw support or in respect of their asylum application as a whole. All of these arguments can still be used. You'll remember recent arguments such as the chicken nuggets, or having to shave off his beard, or for fear of being isolated in the community and things of this nature. All of those arguments have been successfully run through tribunals to prevent deportation orders, and those are for very, very much more serious offences, not just working illegally as a Deliveroo driver. So with the greatest respect, I think this is just not going to work at all, because there is no real deterrent here. Paying a £26 surcharge, victim surcharge, as a result of working illegally out of the thousands that they've stopped and spoken to. And I suspect the cost to the taxpayer of all of that operation will be significantly north of the £26 victim surcharge that has been ordered to pay. And if he doesn't pay it, in theory, he could go to prison. But again, I think that's unlikely. So overall, not really a deterrent. So whilst the law is around and the procedures are around, I just don't think that in reality that's going to be much of a deterrent. Let me know what you think in the comments below. But moving on to the second half of the video regarding the train and the guy that has dropped his trousers in front of children and lots of other people, clearly causing distress, who I now understand has been detained under the Mental Health Act. What would you have done? And let's take a look at the legality of what people did here without commenting and drawing conclusions on it, because whilst it's a live investigation, I understand no one's been arrested yet, so I can comment, but I'll still comment generally. But more about that in just a moment. Don't go away. As an aside, now that the Online Safety Act is well and truly in force and the government has set up this elite police squad to monitor social media for things they don't like, now is absolutely the right time to make sure that you are safe and secure and indeed anonymous when you're online and posting things online. Not that I advocate breaking the law, of course I don't, but it is peace of mind knowing that you've got a cloak of anonymity. And to that end, I use and I am partnered with NordVPN for this video. In fact, I paid for NordVPN with my own money a long time ago and I've used it ever since. It is a virtual private network which gives you access to an anonymous IP address which cannot be tracked. They keep no logs of anything you do and what you visit online, and you can virtually change your location to another country, which gives you access to services which you may not get in this country if they've been restricted. For example, I've seen screenshots and have tested myself certain posts and content on X, for example, that has been restricted in the UK, presumably because of these new laws. But if I use NordVPN and access it from the United States, that content is no longer restricted. And for those of you who are worried, it is absolutely not illegal in the UK to use a VPN, and it is extremely unlikely to ever get banned. And of course, NordVPN has a whole host of security features as well, scanning websites and downloads for malicious content to avoid you getting scammed or hacked. And of course, as they're a partner to my channel, I get you a great discount, which is 4 months extra free using the code BBB, nice and simple, or you can navigate to nordvpn.com/BBB for your discount. It will get you 4 months extra free and of course a 30-day money-back guarantee. So check out NordVPN to stay secure and anonymous while you're browsing online. And don't forget the code BBB for 4 months extra free. And so now to the second half of the video, and you might have seen this clip circulating online. Although I am grateful that the clip is not loading properly, because I'd rather not watch it again and subject you to that. But also I've blurred the relevant section of the imagery here because, you know, YouTube. And thirdly, the British Transport Police actually responded to this post online. The post says, "The London Tube is quickly turning into the New York subway. On this occasion, there were fortunately some real men around to assist. This is London now," they say. Because if you haven't seen it, this guy dropped his trousers and started shouting and swearing at people around and had an argument with those that obviously questioned what he was doing. And because of that argument, a little bit of back and forth, there were punches and kicks and stuff, and it got a bit out of hand, and they ultimately pinned him to the ground and took him off at the next station onto the platform. So they removed him, they ejected him from the train. And presumably that was because they wanted to protect the people on the train, because just a general point on the law here, it is a specified intent offence to expose yourself with the intent that that causes somebody else alarm and distress. But now you'll note that the British Transport Police have said we're currently investigating this incident. The man in the video has been detained under the Mental Health Act and is in hospital. If you witnessed this incident and haven't yet spoken to police, please get in touch with us to assist the investigation by texting this number. Now, there's a couple of things to unpack there. First of all, because he's been detained under the Mental Health Act, that obviously gives rise to the question of any mental disorders which may have led him to commit this act. Now, cross-referencing that with the specific intent offence of indecent exposure, you cannot accidentally or unwittingly commit this offence, because if someone has this particular mental condition and they drop their trousers in the way that he has here, but did not have the specified intent, then you cannot commit that offence. And of course, all of that then would go to a jury. But secondly, it's also reported by LBC that detectives are now investigating whether the other passengers who intervened have committed any offences by detaining the man and removing him from the train. It's headlined by LBC as "Vigilante Tube Passengers Face Arrest Over Assault of Mentally Ill Naked Man on the Tube." Now, it states that he's mentally ill. I mean, just because he's been detained under the Mental Health Act, there might be a suspicion there. There's no confirmation that that's actually the case. And labelling them as vigilante, I don't think is really neutral. I think that's a wrong way to say it. It should just say neutrally that these passengers intervened and removed him from the train, but that's just the way that I see that. I think that should be phrased neutrally. But in any event, there are a number of ways that people could step in such a situation like this. Now, I will first of all make the broad caveat that neither the courts, the police, nor anybody else generally recommends intervening in things like this for fear that you may yourself commit an offence in doing so. Because if you use any force to prevent crime or detain somebody and so on, and that is too much force, you can be prosecuted for assault. So generally it's not recommended, but the law does allow it, so long as you use reasonable force, and that will be a question of fact left to a jury if you were charged with assault. So with the caveat out of the way, there are two possible ways that people can intervene in situations like this. The first is Section 24A of the Police and Criminal Evidence Act of 1984, which allows any person other than a constable to arrest anyone who is in the act of committing an indictable offence, and anyone that he has reasonable grounds for suspecting to be committing an indictable offence. So if somebody on the train, in this generic example, suspected somebody of doing such a thing and that is an indictable offence, then they may arrest that person for doing so under this section. They don't need to be a constable, and they can just have reasonable grounds for suspecting them to be committing that indictable offence. Bearing in mind it requires specific intent and so on, they're not required to be experts in law. This is just what the law allows. And if doing so, two conditions apply. One, it must be that it's not reasonably practicable for a constable to make the arrest instead. And so if you're on a train and there's no police there, then that's obviously not practicable there and then. And secondly, there must be one of the reasons set out in subsection 4, which includes preventing the person from causing harm to himself or anyone else, suffering physical injury, causing loss or damage to property, or making off before a constable can assume responsibility for him. So if those apply, you can make an arrest, and it could be argued that just removing them from the train could be part of an arrest as well. But more generally, the use of force is also permitted under Section 3 of the Criminal Law Act 1967, which allows a person to use such force as is reasonable in the circumstances in the prevention of crime or affecting or assisting in the lawful arrest of offenders or suspected offenders of persons unlawfully at large, etc. Now, this obviously has the emphasis on reasonable force, and that is an objective assessment. Would any ordinary reasonable person think that the amount of force used was reasonable at that time? And that goes for the prevention of crime or affecting, assisting lawful arrest. Now, there's only a suspicion required here, so even if it turns out that the guy has a perfectly valid defense, then this would still usually be a lawful arrest, and so long as the force used was objectively reasonable. Now, I'm deliberately not analysing the video. This is a generic explanation, and I'm not encouraging anybody to go out and start detaining people using reasonable force. That's not the point of why I'm saying this, but the law does allow it. So when people ask the general question, that's what the law says. If it's reasonable force and it's necessary, etc., it can be used. But more generally, if the police were looking at the interveners to prevent this man from doing whatever he was doing, regardless of whether he has any defense or not, if they suspect that he's doing it to antagonize people around him, I personally, personal opinion alert, Let me know if you agree in the comments, or disagree for that matter. But I personally don't think it's in the public interest to be prosecuting people that are stepping in to prevent this from happening. Save unless, of course, it is determined that they used absolutely unreasonable force and they absolutely bludgeoned this guy and it was totally unreasonable and unacceptable. But if the guy leaves just with, minimal bruising or whatever because they've detained him for the reasons, then that might well still be reasonable force. Now, you can use reasonable force and cause minimal bruising and such, but if you start severely injuring somebody, then that obviously changes things. And so, generally speaking, whilst I said the courts and the police, etc., don't encourage people to get involved, I think if people do stand up and get involved to prevent people doing these things, then I think the police and the CPS should think very, very carefully before charging people that do step in and get involved, because I think that, since everyone's talking about community relations recently, particularly between the police and communities, I think they should think very carefully before charging people with getting involved and sorting these things out, because they're happening more and more, it seems, or at least they're reported more and more. If you search this sort of thing up, you see lots of them reported in recent weeks and months. And I think people generally have had enough, and that's why people are stepping in to do something about it. Anyway, let me know what you think in the comments. That is a personal opinion of mine. I think they should think very carefully before coming hard against anyone that's stepping in to prevent these things from happening. But anyway, I hope that was useful. Please do hit the like button on this video. That does help to share it to a wider audience. And as always, thank you for watching.